So we're up to Perek Reish Tzadik Gimel, 293. So briefly, what he's doing is tying up now. Well, this whole sugya, this whole subject matter was about Eris and Kalim, the light, the energy in the container, and how they're antithetical to each other. You know, Er represents the divine, the Keli divine represents the Yesh. Er is Ayin, Keli is Yesh. Ayin means selflessness. Let's put it this way: we may not know what Ayin is, we know what Yesh is. So whatever Yesh is not, that's what Ayin is. Okay? So it's the antithesis of Yesh. Yesh is me, I, a sense of self, which per se is what God wants, but it has the possibility to preclude everything else. Because Ani leads to Ani va'avsiyet, me and nothing else. So, and then there's the counterforce is the Ayin, a sense of awe, a sense of selflessness in the presence of something greater. And the question is, how do these two meet? So after giving a long explanation on the levels of light and energy, what its properties, its personality, moved over to containers, and now trying to find a place where container meets energy. So the gist of it is that the previous akeli is where they meet. The inner part of the container, which is more refined and is more descriptive of the energy as opposed to its function, which is outside of the container, that becomes the place where the energy in the container can meet. And now we're up to the last chapter. We began to discuss how the bittul of the ayin, how the selflessness and divinity and sanctity and kedusha, ayin, bittul of energy, how does that transfer over to the container? So clearly they're not the same level of bittul, because the energy is, after all, much closer and much more reflective of its source. But because it's a container to this energy, it's not like for example, the wick to the flame. It's not an outside foreign element. It's a container, but it's a container that is refined, is close to its energy, close to the energy. Therefore, it has similarities that it can reflect the bittul of the energy. Not quite like the energy reflects the bittul of the source, but how but still there is a connection, an interface. So in the last chapter, 292, after explaining that the two levels of outer and inner container is tselem and dmus, salmenu dmusenu, because we're talking about that tselem and dmus, of course, is the expression of the Torah for the human being is created in the image of God, the image and what do we say, image and shape. So tselem is the inner, well, there's all the levels. Tselem could be the energy and dmus is the container, or tselem is the inner container and dmus is the outer container. So tselem is the first image, and then there's the image of the image. So, speaking about that, he discussed that these are two levels of bittul, Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata. And the difference between them is that in Yichud Ilah, the only thing that you sense is that there's the divine God, Hu Levadeh. And in Yichud Tata, you sense there's a yesh, but the yesh is bottle. So basically, so that's where tselem goes into dmus. In other words, the ayin of the oyer goes into the yesh of the keli. That the yesh of the keli becomes bitl hayesh, and the oyer is bitl mitzias. That's generally speaking. But specifically, the container itself has both levels, because since the previous hakeli is conducive and very refined, closer to the energy, it has that sense of Yichud Ilah as well. Obviously, not quite like the energy itself has it, but has a similarity to that. Okay. Nevertheless, as he concludes in this last paragraph, he says it's still not quite the same bittul. And he expressed the difference is that the Eir, the bittul is dveikus, and the keli is by the bittul of the keli is iskalus. So dveikus means actually a conscious sense that you're one and reflective of the source. Hiskalus means a conscious sense that you're subjugated to the source. It's not the same thing. So Eir is ultimately more bittul than the keli. And this is critical also because remember, we don't want to annihilate the container. We don't want to turn it into energy. We want the yesh to remain, it has to have a personality, or else the whole interface gets compromised. But the subtlety is how does the yesh remain yesh to the minimum extent, shmini sheba shmini, something, and still contain the bittul of the Eir. So
that's Irvega.
That's Irvega Gamu. He doesn't use that expression here right now, but yeah, that's Irvega Gamu Echad, yeah. And Irvega Chayu Echad is the bittul of the Eir. So he says, so even though we learned earlier that the ultimate bittul of Das Elyon, the perspective above, is in Chochmah, where there's no Kalim, relatively speaking, and in Bina is Das Tachton, which means Yechudet Atah, the lower perspective. So he says, because that's in the truth of the picture, that's how it is. Because the real Messias of Yesh, the real entity, not Yesh as in a sense of self outside, but a sense of reality. Real reality is above and below, Primis HaKeser, as he said. And Chetzenish, the outer Keser, is already a root and a beginning of the Netzalim, of the emanations. So therefore, the real bittul is in Primis HaKeser. Kol Mokim, I'm just reading the last 3 lines. Klolos habitl Atzilus begins bittul de Kol Chashuv. Nevertheless, all of Atzilus, if you break it down, it's really Primis HaKeser, which is in Chochmah, or Chochmah Stamah, as we learned earlier. But in general, all of Atzilus has a sense of Kol Chashuv. So even the Das Tachten, bittul de Kol Chashuv, she'ena begins mitzvahs gam begins Das Tachten da Atzilus. That even the lower level of Atzilus, the Kalim in other words, the containers, also ultimately have a sense of that bittul that Chochmah has and Primis HaKeser has. So we have here basically that interface working. Remember, once you go into the world of Beriyah, outside of Atzilus, that's where the Yesh begins to become more dominant. So we're going to continue page Reish Tzadi Gimel. Inyan who
is that called Atzilus Elyon? Towards the end, we got the Rabbi mentioned that we were talking about Atzilus Elyon.
Atzilus the Klolos.
No, it's called Atzilus Elyon.
Well, I have to see what you mean. Can you show
Matzil Elyon, maybe. I'll check for you. I know what you mean.
By Inyan who the Inyan is to explain this. Remember, we're talking here how the bittul of the Eir carries over to the Kalim, which is for us a model of how we can bring into our Yesh some higher sense, some higher presence, which is of course the ultimate challenge.
Yechudet Atah is also in Atzilus?
Yeah, everything is relative, obviously. Yechudet Atah, Kalim is Yechudet Atah, Eir is Primis HaKalim is Yechudet Allah, Chetzenish HaKalim is Yechudet Atah. It's all relative and how you speak. Generally speaking, he spoke about Salam Admus. He saw it for Eir and Keli, Primis HaKeli, Chetzenish HaKeli, and then how the Kelim are in Atzilus and how the Kelim affect Biyah. There's also Salam Admus, and in Biyah is the real Salam Admus. He spoke on all levels here, but that's fine because you're talking here is that there's a process. Remember, eliminate all these steps, and then you have we have a cutoff point where we have no way back. How do you get from here to there? How does a yesh of our world?
Matzil Elyon.
Okay. So the Indian in this is that there's no in a dema. You cannot compare the level.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's right.
Yeah, and it's Atzilus Elyon.
You're right.
Yeah.
Atzilus Elyon
Beginning of
does not-
Shinyut.
That's just Atzilus. That's not anything else.
No, because at one time you did tell us that it was the lower and the higher Atzilus.
Atzilus the Klolos and Atzilus the Protis is the
Right.
name for that's not.
It had nothing to do with that.
Atzilus, in the beginning of the Hemshach, the Rebbe Rashab says that the Alter Rebbe used to call Atzilus Elyon. Atzilus is Elyon. Eibishter. Eibishter means above. Atzilus, that's usually the level of Atzilus. That's what it usually means. But there's Atzilus the Klolos, Atzilus the Pratis, that's a whole different thing. Atzilus the Klolos is everything before the Tzimtzum. Generally speaking, even if he doesn't say it specifically, anything you say about Atzilus, you could say also about Atzilus the Klolos. But what Chassidus, when you talk about Atzilus, you're talking about Atzilus the Pratis.
Okay,
You're talking after the
so why
Tzimtzum.
would he use the word Elyon all of a sudden here?
I don't know, I'm not learning
That's
that, I
Shinyut.
have no idea.
That's Shinyut, that's much further.
Atzilus the Klolos is
Okay.
before
I can look afterwards.
Beginning of Shinyut.
Atzilus the Klolos is before the Tzimtzum?
Yeah.
Yes,
You have to remember-
his idea of Atzilus before he made Atzilus. Basically,
And that's not really the way I would put it, but it's fine. Remember, everything, as we talk about Eris and Kalim, you're right away talking after the Tzimtzum. There are no Kalim before the Tzimtzum. But there's the quantum Atzilus is the Atzilus the Klolos. Atzilus afterwards is not quantum. It's a defined universe. In other words, it's in the state of probability. Lifnei Tzimtzum, everything that's going to come out after the Tzimtzum was there in its, like you say, Esespheres Hagnuzes. So people make a mistake. They think Esespheres Hagnuzes is revealed Esespheres and is hidden. It's not hidden. It's only an example. It means the potential. Because, remember, because of the interface, God wants everything has to be everywhere. If you didn't have all that before the Tzimtzum, then you have a cutoff point. You reach till the Tzimtzum, you can't go further. This gives you the ability to connect within so-called the Godhead. Remember, before the Tzimtzum, so to speak, which is right now also, it's not time and space, it exists right now. Before the Tzimtzum, there's no possibility for us to be. So there's whereas in Atzilus, the world of Atzilus is the real 10 spheres. There's already personality.
This is already Tzimtzum also, even though it's before the Tzimtzum.
That's what the Rebbe speaks of Tzimtzum before the Tzimtzum. But they speak Tzimtzum Adishon, the main Tzimtzum, is the one where there is the real concealment. Everything outside of Atzmus is already, you can say, a form of. But the Rebbe makes it clear, it's not really, you can't really call that Tzimtzum, it's more this, it's another level.
It's Beratzen, not
Yeah.
is shame, we learned.
He's speaking again the two perspectives. Remember, Das Elyon is how God looks at it from above. So there's the Yesh, and we're the Ayin. We are the innovation, the novelty. And how we look at it, we're the Yesh, and that's the invisible mystery. Understand? So it's so there's no, you can't compare these two perspectives, Das and Das Tachna. That Yediyas and Etzolim hu be'efen achal legamri midiyas and Evrayim. Okay. So now we're speaking here. We're not speaking about Eris and Kalim and Atzilus. We're speaking about the difference between Atzilus and Beriyah, Evrayim and Netzolim. I made this point many times, but I just want to emphasize. Netzal and Nivra is not the same thing. Nivra means a creation. Netzal means a impartation, imparting. Chassidus brings Atzilus. The pasuk comes from Pasha Ba'alesko. Vayetzel min haruach. The Mesha says, Hashem says, I will impart from your spirit to the Zkenim. So Chassidus makes it clear, this is not a creation. This is like imparting from his level. So it's an emanation. It's a lower, they're not, the Zkenim are not, the sages were not as high level as Moshe Rabbeinu. But you can't call them a creation. You can also say it's an imparting. So when you say Atzilus in general, you're saying something is Gilead Helen. It's revealing the concealed. Beriyah, you're already saying Yeshmai, it's something completely new. What's the difference? You could argue, one second, anything that's outside of Atzmus is Yeshmai in a way. Well, we've learned this, but basically the difference is in a few ways, two main primary ways. The thing that is imparted, does it sense that it's outside? Or does it sense it's connected? So Eir is also outside, but since Eir's personality is similar to its source, and it has no substance or personality outside of its source, so yeah, from the perspective of Atzmus, you can say it's a new thing. But from the perspective of the Eir doesn't, well, you ask the Eir, there's nothing new here. Whereas Beriyah, a table does not reflect God. You can learn lessons from it. You can find the divine purpose in it. But if you say this table, God forbid, it reflects. It's not a reflection. It's not like sunlight. It's already a product of. So that's distinction number one. Distinction number two is that Eir does not require any so-called extra energy. The divine expresses itself, it's Eir. Keli is already the divine, has to make a plan. I want Chochmah, I want Bina. In other words, if God speaks, that's Eir. But if he wants something specific, he wants this, he wants something specific, that's already requires a different type of unique, the koyach hagvul, so to speak. We has to say, I'm going to. So it's not just the power to do whatever it is. So Eir, in other words, is amorphous. It doesn't have any shape and form. Pashut, pshitus. I mean, there's more differences, but these are two main ones. So they both, from the point of perspective of Atzilus, are both obviously so-called novelty. But you can't really say Eir is a novelty, because when Atzilus does express itself, it looks like Eir, and does look like it does not look like a
What is
container.
Yediyah? What do you mean Yediyah on its own? Yediyah on Ivroim? What is Yediyah?
No, because that's a critical point, because remember earlier you said the whole point, the purpose of Atzilus is for us to know godliness.
Okay.
That's its purpose. That's two purposes. One is to serve as interface to create, and one is an interface to know. Remember, knowing is essentially interface. Think of it like v'yadaitis Hashem. How do we have a relationship with God? Is we can know each other. I mean, in Torah, knowledge is knowing is intimacy. But idea is basically, don't think of it so much as a seichel thing. It's more of a
Oh, sure, because you see that
it's perception. It's the
Who amado, who Yediyah, who Yediyah.
yeah, it's perspective.
Yediyah on Ivroim.
Yeah.
Yediyah on its own. It's
So
all about the Yediyah.
Yeah, no, because basically the idea here does not mean seichel as opposed to midas. The idea here means a relationship, awareness and relationship. You can know something, as opposed to amunah, for example. But the point is that it would be, if you were spoken English, you'd say there's two perspectives. Your perspective, my perspective. Don't use they, use perspective. The divine perspective, and there's the perspective of Atzilus on God, and there's the perspective of Beriyah, of Nivraim on God. You know, it's hard for us to imagine always all the time. It's hard to imagine Atzilus because we're not on that level. But we can extrapolate from what we are, what Atzilus would be like. Right now he's going to explain the difference between the two in order to explain how interface works, how the bitla of the higher comes into the lower. I mean, it's ultimately. I mean, we use the word interface and we say it again and again and again, but it's really the best possible word. You're dealing here with two entities, and they're trying to communicate with each other. And they begin with different premises and different perspectives. But you have to find common denominators, and then you have to find real unity. We're talking about mediation. Think of it, two people who have absolute argument, don't talk to each other. And then we spoke in different ways how you begin first the process of weakening the midas. Don't be so 100% sure. You get both people not to be 100% sure, you already allow for room for communicating. You're sitting at the same table. That still doesn't mean you have unity. And then becomes, how do you get these two to speak the same language when they come from so much different opposite perspectives? So that's really the struggle here. That's why the whole pnimis hakeh, the outer container, inner container. You see, for us, we don't really dissect these things, but if you dissect it, if you take a case study of two people in a disagreement and how they made peace, those rare instances that happens, what you would find that there's a dynamic going on. It's not just they made peace. There's a formula. Now, it's not just they gave up. I'm talking about with work. What happened was that each of them, first of all, began to just recognize maybe I'm not completely the picture. You know, Eir has to have bittul to come to the keli, and the keli needs bittul to reach the Eir. You know, we start speaking about how they replace each other, that they assume each other's properties. And then there's a force, a mediator, that helped them learn to speak to each other. And at some point they become, let's say, best friends, become one. So that would be a perfect example. So dissecting it, there's the point where the pnimis hakeli became close to the Eir, and then it carried that message also to the chitzenis hakeli. You know, I mean, you could definitely develop a whole model. Like, you know, in mediation, one of the things is you try to find the win-win point. You know, where these two people disagree, can find something that they both can agree. Not only agree, but they both will gain. But then the problem is, that would be, I would say, pnimis hakeli meets Eir. My pnimis. But then there's a whole chitzenis that doesn't agree with it. So I said, you know what? That I acknowledge that I need him for. But the rest of him I don't want to have, you know. So how do you bring that into the chitzenis, now the rest of it? Which is more complicated, obviously. But for the interface to work, you need to do that. Like you find this, I mean, even in marriage counseling and stuff like that, you find that sometimes you could find a spark that connected two people, but the problem is the rest of their lives is so different, and you can't bring that here. So there are moments where it works, but you can't say it's working all the time. So the question is, how do you do that? So the same thing with Ayin Yesh. We all have moments, for example, of inspiration where you could, you feel a sense of something, a higher presence, and you're ready to do things for that. You're ready to sacrifice, make sacrifices, commitment, and it may even last. But there's a whole other part of your life that's not necessarily, that's very different. And obviously, Geula Mashiach means that the whole you becomes refined, not just part of you. I'm just saying that. So the process really is. This is the challenge here. So there's no comparison. The perspective. I think maybe that's the best word. It's not just the knowing. The perspective of the Netzolim, of the imparted ones, right, is different. Is completely different than the perspective of the creatures, of the Nevrayim. The Yediyas HaNevrayim v'hergesh shalahem. He uses hergesh now. Their perspective and their feeling.
It's two different things.
Yeah, because they is ultimately is an intellect. Yeah, the das is also Agar. But it says the Yediyas v'hergesh shalahem b'bechinas ayin aliki hu b'bechinas mitzias levad. Yediyas mitzias levad. Because the way the Vrayim know and feel the, let's call it the sublime divine, Ayin Aliki, is only that they know it exists. It's only Yediyas HaMetzias. Le b'chinas HaMahus klal. So let's a moment explain the difference between Metzias and Mahus. Metzias and Mahus, so the Friedrich Rebbe Tafshin Aleph writes that Metzias describes the function. It's like Shema Pu'ula more like. Metzias describes the shape and form of something, and Mahus is Eich U'Mahu. What is it like? So if you describe a table, you'd say a table with shape and form. It has 4 legs. It stands. You can put things on it. But it's not the muhus. That's the mitzias, the table. Muhus will say the table. What is echama? What is it really made? What is it? It's for doing things with it. We make tables in order to eat it on the table.
Muhus is function?
More like function. No. Muhus is not function. Muhus is. It's real.
Yes,
It's soul. It's purpose.
So I would say,
Eich u'mahu is the Friedrich Rebbe's expression. Eich and ma. What? How and what is it really?
so I would say it's made out of mahogany, and it's
That's more
handmade.
mitzias. That's more mitzias. I mean, yeah, you could say mahus mitzias. Mahus would be why in the first place would we build a table? Why would you take a tree and cut it down and have mahogany and make a table? That would be more the mahus of the table. Now, I agree. In mitzias itself, you have the output you see. Exactly. So that's why it's a little it can be a little confusing.
Is it like
But generally speaking, mitzias describes a thing, its shape, its form, its dimensions. Even in a manual, when you get an operator's manual, you have the dimensions of the object, and then there's what its purpose is. Generally speaking, it's something. It's mehus mitzias can be compared to shem ha'pu'ula and shem ha'toyar. You could say yes. You could say that, even though he doesn't say that right now. He's speaking more das Elyon and das Tachten, which is pnimis and Chetzenes Keli, but it's also Er and Keli. But right now it's Atzilus and Beriyah for all practical purposes.
Since you're on the subject,
Remember we spoke, for example, we said about Elikim, Shem Elikim. Shem Elikim creates the nature, but Elikim, he says, is Bala Kayech Vayechelis. When you look at nature, you say Elikim created that, Shem Elikim, God created it through Shem Elikim, that's the Mitzias. But if you want the Mohus of Elikim is the power that God has to create many things. Remember you said it's infinite. There's many powers. So that's the Mohus of Elikim, and the Mitzias of Elikim is what it does. Mohus is what it's capable of doing. So, yes, to explain what a table is to a child, you'd say a table is not just the dimensions, that's the dimension. But what can a table be used for? A table can become Mizbeach if you learn Divrei Torah in it. That's already talking to things that are not. So Yediyas and Mitzias generally means you can see a table, you may not know what its function is, or what its soul is. A table is not a good example because most of us can figure that out. Let's think of something that's mysterious. You see it, but you have no idea what its purpose is. You have no idea what its real function, real. I meant function, I don't mean function as a pool, I mean its real role. It's real, what is it for? There's many things like that. So you could have Yediyas HaMetzias means, you know it's there, but you could be clueless to what its purpose is. It's similar to those names, but that's the thing. So bottom line is, in Yediyas HaNevroim, they know that there's an Ayin Eliki. Think of it like this. What do you mean? What do we know? What perception do we have? And he says, Hergish, he says.
This makes it difficult because now you're saying that you don't know the purpose, but you sort of know the purpose of that.
No, let me explain. I'm going to explain 1 second. So what does it mean? It means like this. Get your ego out of the way and any personal agendas. Every person can sense there's something beyond us. There's a sense of awe. You see it either in nature, you see it in the miracle of life. I mean, in the organization of existence, whatever it may be. So you sense this, that there's something more. I'm not getting out and proving God's existence. That's not the point here. But the sensing something more doesn't mean you have any idea of the mahus of it. It means that you know something's there. It's like you know something is there. I don't know what it is. A good example may be the soul. And you see the debates that rage. There's no question there's a difference between a corpse, God forbid, and a live body. Everything is intact. The brain, the heart, the body, the eyes, the ears, the limbs, everything. And then a second later, electricity is gone. That thing is no longer alive. So there's no question that we know there's a mitzias of life. You want to call it electricity, you call it energy. I'm not even getting down to the religious definition of it, but it's something. Someone say, what's the muhus of it? I have no clue. Is it electricity? Is it a divine power? Is it something in between? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Can I create it? We can't replicate it. So we can't even do that. So that's a good example. Neshama, we have Yediyas HaMetzias in Neshama, but you don't have Hasogas HaMuhus. Now, remember, some places like Chassidus will say we have a little Muhus. This right here is basically saying so you can know that something exists, and definitely know, not a faith, we're not talking faith here, but yet, and you could be clueless to what Muhus, Mahu. Muhus means Mahu, what is it? What is a soul? No one's ever seen it. What does it look like? The truth is you could say the same thing even about electricity. We know it exists, but what is it exactly? It's force. So today science will give you a description, but still, there's certain mysteries to it. Like any. So therefore, in Nevrayim is only Metzias, Yediyas HaMetzias Levad, Leibchinas HaMahus Klal. Doesn't know what it is. It knows that it is, but it doesn't know what it is. You could say it is or what it is. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
And when we know the Metzias,
since we're all men here, sometimes if you're married for many years, you know that you realize the Elam Alma de Nukva is something like that too. You know it's there, but you don't know what it is. It's that. And they say the same about us. And the question is whether we even know who we are. I know I exist, but I don't know what, when, where, what,
The Metzias is also only from its polar, right?
Yeah, come to think of it, do we have any muhus in anything? What muhus do we know? What do we know? Which we know everything only Metzias.
Who the bleep are we, like they say in the quantum?
Right. What the bleep do we know? Yeah.
The Yediyas HaMetzias comes only from the polar, Chalal?
It's an example. It's not, it's very hard to, we're trying to find, there's so many ways to explain this. But generally you can explain it in many ways. But this, essentially, think of it, it's the lower level of a perception of something. It would be exactly, let's say give a child a clock or something. It sees the clock and then starts taking it apart to try to see what's going on. I mean, that would be like going from Metzias to Muhus. So it has it, but doesn't know what it is yet.
By the way, what you're saying...
I think, it's just interesting. Koyach ma is muhus. Ma, and we say ma, it's what? What is that? Not that it's there. I want to know what it is. And that always has an element of mystery to it. There's a certain mystique.
When you're saying, come to think of it, which Muhus do we know? Some might argue that there's no such thing as Muhus. There's only Metzias.
Fine, okay. No, but for example, the soul.
No scientist.
No scientist.
There's only Metzias.
The old-fashioned scientists, Descartes and stuff like that.
Right.
They all said that. They all said that.
They all said what?
Is there no mahus?
Exactly. There's only Metzias. No stairs
That's
mahus.
it.
Only what you see.
It's only what we see and that's it.
Hold on one second, the soul. Is it,
There's no soul. What kind of soul?
energy, is there energy?
Woman's bacon.
So energy is defined as what it is.
No.
As what it is.
I want to know what is this energy made of? What kind of energy is it? They don't.
So you
That's.
figure out it's made of
I
particles.
know this too, but I mean.
But there's
No,
stairs mahus.
I'll tell you the truth. I wouldn't agree with that. I think that every scientist will tell
No,
you.
but I'm saying that some might argue there are some
But how could
schools.
you argue that? But whole science is based on the Mahus,
Amen.
besides the Metzias.
Are there some
Right?
schools of thought like that?
Not the old.
No.
What?
Not the Newtonians. Not the.
You're imposing your own idea of Mahus and Metzias. The simple thing that something has, that matter is not just matter, but has energy in it. That's Mahus.
Energy could be Metzias too.
But the body, the matter, it's Mahus.
They're all trying to understand what it is, not
Right.
just that it is.
The question is, if that what has divinity, it's another story. And who put it there? I'm not talking about the religious. But that everything has, look, the fact, as soon as you say something has molecules, and you can manipulate those molecules, you're talking about Mahus. Look, you're not talking about Mahus of
It's a
Mahus.
relative thing you're saying. You're bringing it that has molecules. You're talking about mahus, and then you're talking about
Molecule could be Metzias too.
Then you're talking about it's a relative. It's
So
a relative
so
thing.
mahus
What
could
we
also
don't-
be
we're
obviously.
defining what we don't know is mahus, and what we know is Metzias. No matter where you're talking.
That's exactly
Example of
the.
the clock.
First of all, he's talking about Ayin Eliki here. We're not talking about.
Clock is, all the whole science is taking it apart and trying to figure out exactly how it works,
Right.
what it's about.
No. What you're saying is that they're saying is so it's a more subtle Metzias. Well, since when does Mahus have to be divine? No one said Mahus is divine. I said Metzias and Mahus applies to any discovery.
I'm not saying Mahus has to be divine. What I'm saying, what they will argue is that there's no such thing as Mahus, and because you come from a divine perspective,
No.
you believe in a concept of Mahus.
No. I
Like you
disagree.
don't have
No.
no
What's that?
such argument.
There's no such argument. Even the most existential atheist doesn't say that. They'll say there's nothing wholly divine, it wasn't with the intelligence, it's a force within, whatever you want to call it. Because we have to define, I think it's semantics here. What do you mean by Mahus? You mean Mahus, you mean, using a Hebrew word. Let's say I use the word Mahus. I told you, Mahus to me means inner. A table and its inner purpose. Forget about God. That's with God here right now.
Well, it's relevant. Mahu, what is it, as
Right.
opposed to that it is.
Yeah. Let's move on, let's go on. Now,
I
then
find
it's
it
always a relative
really
term.
how to understand science that without disconnecting it from God, I cannot understand it.
There's a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Metzias and Metzias, Mahus and Metzias, Metzusim, 4 levels.
Logically,
Your FFB,
like
that's
logically.
no, you're absolutely right.
Borum, I think.
But who says since when is life logical? You know, you're a logical man. Even the great David Hume, who was this man of reason, he said the best.
Biggest the parishes there ever lived.
Right. So David Hume said that the best use of reason is to be a slave for its passions.
David Hume would say you can take this cup, and it's not necessary that it's going to fall down, because we don't know it. That's it, period.
Anyway, the point I'm making here is, one second. I just want to say one thing about this. I always thought about, when you're younger, the fact of the matter is, like the Rebbe Rashab said, that sometimes atheists are closer to the truth than believers. Because when they say God doesn't exist, we say God exists, we mean he exists like we exist. They say it doesn't exist means the real non-existential. Yeah. So the real question is like this. You have 7 billion people on this planet. A certain percentage will say they believe in God. Certain people will live a life following higher order, meaning they're paying the price. And yet, everybody's capable of behaving in a way like there's no God. Right? There's no one immune to that. Because from a Chassidish point of view, because God concealed his presence. From a non-believer's point of view, because they're, whatever it may be. So the bottom line is like this: a building testifies to an architect, a book to an author, a painting to an artist, a music to a composer, and yet when it comes to the most eloquent thing in existence, which is the universe, and undeniable, nobody will say that any artist ever created beauty like nature creates. Right? Yet we suddenly the logic that we attribute to everything, a table, a baker. Something that not necessarily there's a creator. So when I was younger, I used to say, and that to prove ein dover eses atzmei, especially an organized thing. We all dismiss it, but when you get older, you start thinking, like you just said, it's absolute logic. Why is that not sound absolute proof? Everywhere else, there's no person on earth would say that this building came here by itself, and this building is not so complicated. People can replicate it. Life is very complicated. The human eye. To make that, And yet there's a whole theories that intelligence that's in nature and evolution, and you know what's it called? Darwin's natural selection, and it adapts and all that. And so to me, the only answer I've ever come up with, and tell me what you think, is because we're negay b'davar. One little thing. If someone tells me there's an architect of this building, who cares? I don't have to pay him any dues. So there's an architect, what do I care? But he's only telling me if I have to sit here and I have to start doing things because I walked into your house, I'll start saying, who says? Maybe it just fell into place. And that, if a non-believer would say, I have vested interest in there's no God, I've got no problem. Start off with that qualification, because if there's a God, then I may be responsible to him. There's no God, I'm not responsible. So we're not interested in that proof. That we have vested interest not to believe that proof. That to me is the only ultimate realism. And I looked around, and recently I found
Cayman is smirking. Why are you smirking?
No, Aldous Huxley is the only guy I ever found that actually admits this. He writes. I'll show it to you. You got to see this. It's amazing. He says he writes. In one of his places he writes. Someone sent it to me, and I saved it. He writes that. Let me begin with this premise. I am invested in no God because I do not want someone telling me what to do. I want to do whatever I want, and that's the basis of all my theories. At least he says it. That I completely, and I don't want a religious person to say my axiom is I believe in a God, and I feel we're if people would just say that so a religious person is fanatic, no, but a scientist is supposed to be let him be transparent. Let him say the first thing is I have interest in this conclusion. That's my little theory about this, how the yesh doesn't want to relate to the ayin. That's why I'll tell you why, because sometimes you read in my modem it says. You don't need a munah that there's a God, my malaklam. You need a munah for sevav kalam. And I used to say to myself when I was young, I used to say, the Rabbi is a very high madrega, mir hat nicht bei them. We need a munah. And then I said, no, it's not true. If you take away my interest, of course, that there's much more sensible that an architect put it. You need a stronger argument to prove that someone didn't build a building and someone did build an organized building. I'm not saying you can't bend over backwards and do it, but you have to have a reason to go there. Why would you do that? If you're a healthy, normal person, you'd say, a building, where's the architect? A world, where is the creator? I mean, that would be the natural thing unless you got jaded and you have interest otherwise. I'm saying that's why. So, and even after this, guaranteed we all can do a little aveda here and there. Why is that? Because the Tzimtzum Arishin, my friends, is very powerful. After all this, correct?
It's not our fault though.
This man is trying to convince me that we have no free will since I met him.
Not at all.
No, I'm saying, the Meir Alila, the plot.
That's because that's brought down by the Rebbe. The Rebbe said there was free will, but it was a very unlikely.
Isaac Bashevis Singer said, we must believe in free will, we have no choice. Never heard that one?
You said that?
Let's. It's a pretty smart line, actually. Because that really throws you on a twist. What do you think, Elias? Huh?
Yeah, the Rebbe said Hashgacha Pratis and
Yeah. Anyway.
and free will.
Okay, so let's continue. Let's continue.
Both in the same
Today I
level.
do have to earlier because I have to let it go somewhere. Okay.
The fact that we can think that we exist, that the world exists without a creator, isn't that a revelation of Atzilus? It says in Chassidus in more than one place.
Yeah. That's the yesh, because that Atzmus, who has no source, created us to feel like we have no source. So no, absolutely, it comes from somewhere. That's the Alter Rebbe's big chiddush. That's Meirdik chiddush. That's correct. It's not just the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum conceals God's presence, but that the fact that yesh can feel self-made is because Atzmus has no source. That's what it says in Tanya.
Don't tell Mo.
That's one of the. That's the biggest chiddush.
That's why it's
the Alter Rebbe. Nobody said that before.
What is that?
That means the yesh, not just the yesh. It's not like you usually think the yesh is like something to work on. We have to get rid of the yesh, but he's saying that the yesh of the yesh, the feeling that we're self-made, comes from Atzmus itself, and that has to be transformed.
That's Alter Rebbe or Michael Rebbe?
Alter Rebbe. It's a tanya. Geras Hakedesh, Shimon The Likutei Diburim, it says that when the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe wrote that, the Chassidim who understood that one line, were making tumble, so they were going crazy. They went nuts from it.
Yeah, it's 20.
Yeah.
It shows how God, that's how godlike we
Could you
are.
restate that, what you're saying, the main Kiddush is, could you restate that first?
It's one of the biggest Kedushim of the Alter Rebbe, that the Yesh, he says, Hu levade bekechi. Only Atzmus is the power to create something that feels it has no source, because Atzmus has no source. So he gave in us, basically, in other Maimorim, it explains, he imparted in us that etzem of sensing, that the ultimate aniva avsi'ed, that can be the worst part of all destruction, comes because God gave us a personality.
Atzilus is not self-made. Atzilus is
Metzius and
always
Atzmus.
there.
No, Metzius means not self-made. That's not the word I use. It means that it doesn't. There's no source. He has no source. There's Metzius and Atzmus.
It's in the Kodesh Chok.
Yeah.
Doesn't,
You never heard this before?
In Basel Legani, Tafshin Yadalef.
That was. I wouldn't even be here if I didn't hear that.
I think he's explaining it in Tafshin Yadalef.
Yeah,
This
of
is the
course.
mile of the Orbit Achtenim. That's why it's Abba, because the other elements is Yerida Mirapanav.
Okay, let's continue here. Huh?
isn't that something that the Rebbe says that we should be using that to, at this time, is an important, very important thing to use that?
Of course, it's transforming the yesh. It means you're not. We're not out. We're not here to destroy the yesh. We're here to transform it, that it should feel the yesh hanivra. You feel in all the sikhs, especially in later years. Yesh hanivra becomes what yesh haniti. That's Mashiach. That the yesh, not annihilation of the yesh, that the yesh hanivra realizes it's one with the essence of the divine. That we're like. Let's continue here. So there's no comparison. One is b'dias hametzias, and b'dias hamuhus. Because creatures like us, the creations, have no idea about the muhus of the ayin aliki, of what it is, of this divine. I don't want to say nothingness. Is the divine. What did I say before? The divine selflessness, the divine ayin mystery. Because if we actually perceived it, the way one's supposed to perceive something, there would be no yesh at all.
Here the mahus does not mean purpose.
I said muhus, I was explaining the word muhus in general, just to understand muhus as opposed to metzias. First of all, it could also include purpose, but it means the inner significance of it, the inner meaning of what it is. It could also say it's also part of purpose also. What is the purpose of the ayin? What is its personality? In other words, we know it's there, but we don't know what it's like. Let's put it that way. That's the bottom line. We don't have to go into the word purpose here as a we could call it the descriptive as opposed to function.
And it could be any part of the elevator. It could
And because the savas of the creations, the Nevrayim we're talking, are in a form of enarech, which means infinitely distant, the Gamri completely distant. This is going back to something he's talked about. Remember I said before, so if both come from the divine, Eir and Keli, or Ayin and Yesh, what's the difference? So I said two things. Now, one is that the Ayin looks like the Etzem. It reflects the Etzem. I'm not talking about the personality, the inner personality of Atzmos, but it's not anything outside of. Sunlight, light of the sun, is nothing but sunlight. And whereas a Kelim, or Yesh, in this case, Das Tachten, and Vroim, come from the source, but they're not reflective of the source. They're apart from it. And when you look at them, you don't necessarily see what the source is like. You may know there is this, like I said, the design of the universe tells you there's an architect, but you don't know what the architect is like. So the Savosim is also, the creation is in a way of Enarech. It's completely concealed. To the point, so that they know only of its existence, but not its muhus at all, what it's like. Mahu.
So we don't
You could say Eich, you could say Hu Nimtza, he's there, but Mahu, I have no idea.
We don't know.
It's like the elephant in the room.
How do we know that the ore is like it? If we don't know anything about the Metzias of Atzmos, how do we know the ore is like it? Why would you say that?
What was that?
We don't know anything of the Metzias of Atmos. How do we know that the Or is like it? That's a lang question.
So what's your answer?
That's a lang
You
question.
don't understand the answer?
Because there's a level of mayor too. And
Mar.
Nor.
First of all-
we mentioned this a little later, but it's not certainly not clear from what you're saying.
First of all, we're not talking
Mike,
about.
you gotta trust what it says also.
I gotta understand what it says. I trust it.
First of all, we're not talking about us knowing the Ur. We're talking about the Ur knowing the Etzem. The Ur has a connection to the Mhus of the Etzem, and the Keli does not. The Yesh does not. That's the bottom line. Forget about us. Secondly, remember, at the end of the day, the Ur and Keli will speak to each other. So we do get a sense. Even Mitzias doesn't mean complete. When you say you know it's there, it's something you know, little something. But the bottom line here is not talking about now knowing the Ur. He's talking about knowing the source.
Yeah.
So fine.
The Or knows the source. The Or is getting operating instructions from the source. He wants to go to the source, but it doesn't mean.
I wouldn't say it's getting operating instruction, not at all. The opposite. When Etzem expresses itself, it looks like Ur. It's an expression of it doesn't have anything else.
They both get operating instructions.
Well, everything comes from God's will, so it's always willed. But Ur is doesn't need operator's instructions because it just doesn't have any substance of its own.
No, but he's listening.
It just needs to know that it has to emanate.
He has to know that he has to come down to the Keli
Okay.
and go against his own will to be merged with the Ayin.
And since it only knows the mitzias of its source and not the mahus, that's why it's only bitla hayesh. Because as he said, if it had known the source, mahus, there'd be no yesh, let alone bitla hayesh. There wouldn't be yesh. There'd be bitla mitzias. So it's bitla hayesh, it exists, but I know that something else is there. It would be the equivalent, as I said, we know that the Creator put this existence in place. That doesn't mean we cease to exist. It just means we know that someone put us here and made it and with the design, with the plan. Like the good Imam Chazal, it's a medrash. That when God extended his finger, his small finger, Beinayim,
That's where
and when
Michelangelo
God
got it
expands his finger, which means that it's gonna be Mevatel Mitzvahs, huh?
from? That's where Michelangelo got it from? So this medrash?
And when God extended his finger, small finger among them, for Yedua, what's Etzba? What's Etzba Ruchnis? Yedua Etzba Yaktan B'chinas Malchus the Atzilus. Mokar HaNidlayim. Oops.
You're good.
Etzba Yaktana is a mashal for, is the level of Malchus the Atzilus, which is the source of Nivroim, of Beriyah. Ukesher Hoya Gilim Em B'chinas HaMalchus Yeser Ma'achek HaKotzuv. So what does it mean? It means God created, Malchus creates, through Malchus, God creates Beriyah, Nivroim. But then, something additional happens. He extends that finger to the point where Malchus is more than Chek HaKotzuv. Chek HaKotzuv is the measured, Chek HaKotzuv, the measured amount, you'd say, right? Chek HaKotzuv is measured.
It's ration.
The ration, right. The rationed amount. Chek is also rule, law. What is by law, so to speak, by the laws of nature or laws of existence, the amount necessary to create. So that does not. Then we have a creation like ours. Everything is fine. But if there's an additional, there's an overflow. So what happens then is, so he's interpreting that it means when God extends His finger, it means that now they're just seeing the mitzias. Now there's also a overflow. And that they're sensing Gili B'chinas Mehusayin Alaki suddenly being revealed. Sorfon. That's the end of this mashal. Of the Imam Chazal. Heishach Baruch Etzboy Yekdan B'neim v'Sorfon. They get burned. Shenis Batel Mitziyusum L'Gamri. They get consumed, and their Mitziyus gets completely bottled. What happened to Nadav and Avihu, or to the other three people when they went into the paradise? Or to anyone that has a divine revelation and they don't have the containers for it. So generally, if you think about it, okay, it's only an overwhelming energy, they got burned up. But if you really think about why'd they get burned up? So we think they got too close. But what does that mean, too close? It doesn't mean physically close.
Get consumed.
What happened to them was they saw a revelation that was more than they are. So till now they only saw the mitzias of it. Mitzias does not burn you up, does not consume you. As soon as you sense the mahus, and you would go, and it's no longer a mystery, it's overwhelming. So there's a beauty, certain necessity for concealment. The equivalent would be also when a teacher teaches and they doesn't conceal as it is, will overwhelm and confuse the student. So the concealment is necessary. So the mitzias is so you know there's something there, but if you get too close to what it is,
Then Mahusha-
what
whatever you
Hashem
can
says to
handle.
Moshe Rabbeinu, no man can see me and live. Why can't you see me and live? Why can't God create a miracle? Because then it's not you. You're no longer you. Once you see that type of thing, you know. Ili Yadaita V'Yisrael is the expression. If I knew him, I'd be him. So he doesn't use that here, but that's the same idea. If I knew him, I would be him. You know. So if you're not him, it means you only know that he's there, but you don't know him. You're not one with him.
In Tel Shalom, there is an expression that the Rebbe said, Yadaiti V'Yisrael.
When he's learning the Likutei Torah, the Rebbe, when he learns the Likutei Torah. The Rebbe explains because he already made his kalim for it.
So it's a moose, you can say relatively is whatever you can't handle. You can define it almost like that. And whatever you can handle is mitzias. Whatever you can, moose is that level which you can't handle anymore.
I wouldn't-
It seems to be, because all the examples we're giving is such a relative thing. Sometimes this, sometimes this. So if you just say, anybody by definition can't see the moose. Once they can see it, it becomes a mitzias for the next moose they can't handle.
It may be correct, but I don't know if that's what he's trying to say here. Let's put it this way. You know, because that's a different discussion. Here, the point that he's trying to, in the interface, is trying to explain how something can experience something else that's higher than it and still be itself. So that's why Das Tachten remains, Das Tachten is important for it, so it's the Metzias. Obviously, the ultimate goal is that the Mahus and Metzias become seamless. But that comes only after a lot of avodah and work, where the containers become one with the light, with energy. But, yeah. So the Mizbat Mitzvah Avlanetz. This is Nevroim. So we just finished Nevroim. So to sum up, Nevroim is Bitla Yesh. Let's put it the other way around. It's Bitla Yesh, why? Only the Yesh is Batla because they only know the Mitzias of the divine, not the Muhus of the Ayin Eliki. Had they known the Muhus of the Ayin Eliki, they would no longer be Yesh. So they only know the Mitzias. And their creation is with the distance, meaning that they're not an extension of the source, like light would be. And as such, let's put it this way, light is not Yesh. Why is it not Yesh? Because it's an extension of the source. If it was not an extension of the, if it was a Yesh, it wouldn't be an extension of the source. You can't be an extension of the source and have a personality. That's the bottom line. It's either God or it's you. Put it bluntly. Now, of course, with the interface, the you can become sublimated and channeled. A channel to the divine. So everything is relative, but at the end of the day, there is Eir and Keli. Eir is a reflection of the divine, as you said before, and Keli can be a tool of the divine, but it's not an extension of it. You know, we spoke of the difference between Shatchin and Shliach and stuff like that. You
But
know?
I'm a little confused here because it seems like few things. One is that all of Chassidus is to understand the mystery of God. All of us here believe there's a Metzias of God. Well, we wouldn't be here. We believe that God exists. But what are we doing where we're all involved in trying to understand and the Mahus, how he works, the mystery of it, what it is. That's first of all that we can. If you say the idea is klal Mahus, I know. So what are we doing here? We're trying to understand the inner workings of God, that the Mahus of Hashem.
Hold on. We're doing here, one second, before you continue. We're here to finish the Perek, and maybe he answers this question. Understand? So if you were really here for the purpose, you'd wait till the Rebbe finishes his point.
Okay, so
And then-
the second thing is,
Or else you'll be stuck in Mitzias the rest of your life.
yeah, the second point here is when we're saying that if you know him, you would be him. You know, it seems to me that's the whole goal of Torah and mitzvahs. The whole goal of Mashiach is to become Maliyar Deus Hashem, become one with God, so that we are.
But the Eibishter wants a dir b'tachteinim.
Yes.
So he wants it on our terms. That he can do it is very easy for him. For us to do it, you see, look, we have a world that's full of problems. If it was so simple.
No, but that's the goal.
The goal, yeah, but the goal
What
requires.
is that?
But you know something? It's like what the Rebbe says with Havdalah. If you want to connect Shabbos to the weekdays, first you have to separate and say Shabbos is not like the weekdays. The first thing we need to know, we're not God. We need to know how distant we are before we can get close. And that begins the process of getting close. So the process of refining the containers is first knowing that we're containers and we have a distance. And then slowly we get closer. Look, it's ultimately Ava and Yir. There's things that bring us close, and there are things that we have to sense always mystery. And of course the goal is that. But we have to start from the beginning. The beginning is that there's one God, there's a God, and we're not God. And that's immediately a mystery. And you know, obviously, as you begin to integrate that mystery into your life, some of it won't be mysteries anymore, but then there's going to be new mysteries. And that process continues forever. Even after Mashiach comes, by the way. There's never going to be, we and God are just like, hanging around.
Why not?
Because it's an infinite journey. Because there's no such thing as and this is not, because you think, no, because humans think in terms of, okay, when am I finally getting my reward and my vacation, and we retire. And God doesn't think like that. For God, it's Yachim Chayil Chayil, and it's endless. And we'll be at peace with that.
But that's reminds me of that famous
Look,
story.
in the material world, we think in terms of reward. We think, okay, I worked hard, now I want my retirement, my pension.
Yeah.
And the divine, it doesn't work that way.
But the
Mashiach Geula will be that the material universe now is refined enough to go with the journey forever. And there's no longer a battle with evil and stuff like that.
So
But then it's an endless journey into the light.
We won't reach even when Mashiach is coming. We still
We'll
just be in a higher level, but we are not going to reach the ultimate.
The ultimate is never reachable. So what's wrong
The
with that?
Niglok Ved Hashem, what's going to happen then?
Wolf in the lamb.
but that journey, in a way, that journey I sort of disagree with completely, because it's that famous story about the one person climbing up
It's
the
not my
mountain.
opinion. This is my Mordech Chazal. You
Well,
disagree
just
with very
let me
great
explain
people.
what I meant.
Like I read, asked a few weeks ago, a guy wrote I want to digress one second. He wrote Alan Bloom from Chicago University of Chicago. He wrote him like a Shakespearean expert. So a guy wrote a whole critique on Shakespeare. He wants to hear Bloom's response. So Bloom once sends him back a short little note. He says, "If you stab a king, you better kill him." So I'm just saying.
I don't understand any king, but all I'm trying to say is
That's
that
good,
mashal
but
about the person that was climbing up the mountain the whole time, and it takes him a whole lifetime to get there, and he finally comes up and he sees somebody there. He says, "Hey, how did you get here?" He says, "I was born here." Meaning that I don't know necessarily what this idea that you said we're not God. I'm not so sure that's a problem.
You're not stabbing the king now? You're not stabbing the king? You're slaying him.
I mean, the fact that we have a nefesh elokis. A nefesh elokis, that's
We
a
have free
chiddush.
will.
That's a chiddush.
We have free will.
Well, listen, one second. Some people attributed. Hey.
So when
Some people attributed creationism to the Rebbe, but now you're talking all of us are creators.
No, I'm just trying to say that we're, in a sense, that when you say we can never become one with God, we have God in us from the
Yeah,
very
the whole
beginning.
religion based
It's just
on it.
revealing that in us. It's like conquering the
free will.
city. It's like transforming the other yesh in us, the nefesh.
It's really not the thing. Let's put it this way. In truth is, if we're really learning properly, this is completely not relevant to this mimer altogether. When I was teaching in high school, you do this. You go one thing. The ideas are all good, but it's not focused on what we're learning here. You don't realize that.
I'm trying to talk about Mahus here, the one that is.
Listen, we
Well,
learned
so
this the
clearly-
whole
so
weekend.
clearly-
We expect
so-
answers when we see you, Simon.
So the
We
answer.
learned this the whole weekend.
Okay.
How we expect the professor
Okay.
to give us answers.
Okay. Yes, let me just say one thing. You're a living proof of how you're making this argument that we're not God, because you just said to me that you don't agree with this approach. What do you mean? So then you don't agree with the Rebbe Rashab and the Alter Rebbe and Moshe Rabbeinu
with it.
and every whole Torah?
I'm trying to understand.
No. I understand. No, my point I'm trying to make is like
Your
this.
legs.
You know? I'm trying to understand it. I have.
Let's establish one thing. Are you making an argument that you do have Yediyah Samahos?
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay, so then you're
That's
one.
what I think. I think I'm trying to say that. I'm trying to understand.
No. Do we
I'm trying to
aspire?
understand
One second.
it this
No.
way.
You aspire to it or you have it?
I'm just trying to say that. I'm trying to understand.
I asked you a
how
question.
this-
1 second.
Okay,
Do you
I'm
have it
answering.
or we aspire to it?
I would answer that Chassidus, learning Chassidus is the process of is Judaism roots.
And the Rebbe Rashab would say, it says in Torah Shalom, that with all your learning, you probably just know a little more mitzias. That's what probably be the
Okay,
response.
so that's what I'm trying to get to.
So
Yes,
clearly,
that's-
so one
I
second.
understand
So
that.
maybe you have to know what Mahus is before you say
That's right.
you have it. You know, Mahus.
Because you said earlier, Mahus.
He said a statement here, a very black and white statement. If you had Yediyas Mahus, there'd be no longer a Yesh. So if there's someone here that's not a Yesh, then we can start talking. I can't say I'm not a
Because
Yesh.
then you went on for the last half an hour describing what Mahus is. And to me.
One second, when he said that line,
I understand, that's
forget
what-
about my explanation. He said a line that if you had Yediyas Mahus, you would not be a Yesh. So there's a rule here. It's not just, so the question is simply this. Can a Yesh have Yediyas Mahus?
No,
It's
it is not.
According to not. So now, you ask another question. What will be la'asad love after we finish the refinement process? And the yesh becomes a container to lakus, and we finish this maimer and hemshech, and so on. And we become a container. Can the yesh then have more yediyas and mahus? The answer will be yes. But he's talking the present. He's talking, this is how it is. Nevroim as they are. God makes too much revelation, we will be consumed like a fire consumes. That's what he's saying here. Are we aspiring? Of course, the whole point of this hemshech is that the interface helps us grow. But to say we're there already is ridiculous. We're not there. First of all, we'd have geula if we were there. V'nigla k'ved Hashem, all our deis Hashem. Come on, just look inside our hearts and souls. What are we capable of? The worst. We have machlekes. We have pettiness.
No, don't
Selfishness.
elaborate.
So what are we talking about? With all the chassidus we learn.
That we have a Mahus understanding.
You know what I'm saying? So with all the chassidus we learn, look how easy it is to gravitate back to the yesh part. So the answer is that chassidus slowly does its work, and if a person really takes it to heart, they'll work on themselves. But even the biggest chassidim will say the yesh remains very powerful. And when Gershon Ber Paharer and others asked him what he's looking forward to the last night of his life, he says that finally I won't lie for once. That's what he looked for. He won't lie.
Finally, I won't lie for once.
Yeah, we're liars, malicious, not definitely duplicitous. Come on, the whole world is this way. So that I know is a muhus for sure. That we have ideas in muhusin, correct? That this world is a problem. Now, but we don't believe that this is the etzem of the world. We believe the world is created by God, that the divine energy is there. But don't ever underestimate the tzimtzum addition.
You know, when Avram Mayor was
Because it
sick,
comes back to bite you whenever you think
Simon.
it's not there.
You can ask Dr. Rosen, when Avram Mayor was sick, like
Yeah.
at the end of his life.
Yeah.
So he went to the doctor, the Rosen. So his son said he has this, and then the grandson said he has this, and iedereen gesagt what he has. So Dr. Rosen says, let's ask him, what's up? So Rabbi Avram, tell me the truth. What's bothering you? So Avram says, a whole life I'm lying with Tamoli, I'm going to tell you the truth.
That's so cool.
Was it Gershon Bell or Shmuel Bell? Beriyah Bell is the same person?
I'm about to die, that's the truth.
It's not the same with
No,
Shmuel and Beriyah Bell?
the stories with no, maybe you're right. Maybe the stories with Shmuel, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah,
But Gershon Bell was a different person.
yeah,
Yeah, Shebet Pah.
yeah. My father's named after him.
Bechlal,
So bottom line is,
what do you need kelim bechlal? If you are making the oiris lower, you're getting it. That's a whole. Rav Talmud. He's making lower the oil, and the Talmud is getting it. What do you need kelim bechlal?
well, as soon as you say Nesava Kosh Baruch Hu Did It B'Tachtenim, means that there's a makabel to receive. It's not enough in Chelik Vav. The Rebbe speaks. It's not enough that the light of the divine reaches the lowest levels. That's not Did It B'Tachtenim. Did It B'Tachtenim means there's something that initially is not receptive and it becomes receptive to receive. That's the whole purpose of existence. That's why we have children. That's why you have students. You could just say the whole purpose. Put one person on earth and let him teach, and nobody ever, let him just be Imam Shecher. The whole purpose is that something receives the divine and internalizes it. That's what only a keli can do that. Can never do that. Can be very powerful and go extend infinitely, but it can never contain something. It can never be an outside entity that contains. The whole purpose is that it has to be something that is initially antithetical to God and receives. Can never do that. Is never antithetical
But
to
when you
God.
have Eram and Mali, and you're shrinking it.
You're shrinking it, but it's still not keli. It's still not a container. You can shrink all the light you want. You're not going to have a tachtenim. You're not going to have. You need for the purpose not getting the reason for the purpose. The taiva, there's no kasha. For the purpose of existence, you need to have something that is not divine. No question. That's tachtein. Tachtenim, not in mokim, in gilui elokus. Eir is gilui elokus. No matter how you twist and turn it, the most diminished eir is still a divine entity. It never can be something opposite of God. Yesh is opposite. That can be transformed. And that's not relative, by the way. That's not relative. There is, that's why, and we've had this ongoing argument. Quantum has to be brought into a substantial reality that has parameters. God created a world of parameters. At the end of the day, parameters matter. Now, you could say you want to connect the world of parameters to a world beyond parameters. Absolutely. That paradox is going to happen. But to say there's no parameters is not correct.
So this is like a teacher without a school.
Because then that's what the Avedis HaKadosh is saying. Because if say he doesn't have a Keyach HaGvul, then you're limiting him. But you want Gvul. You must have Gvul.
His brother just said we're part of the process, that's all.
Now, I just want to say,
We are the
I think, look, I'm no problem with you saying to me, we're here to ask questions, I'm here to answer anything you like. But you want me to tell you the biggest thing I can give you instruction in? We're not learning the mind way we should be learning it. We're going, everyone's bringing here their own ideas in from things they learned from elsewhere. If you want to learn Pshat here, you have to become a Ben Chomish Mikra. What is the Rebbe Rashab saying here? As if you never learned anything before. I could say this as a chayzer, that's how we had to hear the Rebbe. So I'm not saying this to say Musa, I'm just saying we're not learning the way, we're bringing too much of our Metzias into this, into our Yesh if you want.
You need more bittul.
No, because, we're going very interesting subjects, but bottom line is, to me, right now, I'm myself trying to get back, what is he saying here, and opposed to what we're discussing. Again, there's no problem having discussions, you just have to know when you discuss and when you learn.
Tomorrow night's for bringing 9 o'clock by Mr. Bashkin's house.
I don't want to silence anyone, I think everyone should, but I think that the focus that everyone should have is, what is he saying, and the way I understand what's being said here. If you have a question, ask on this.
You'll be there tomorrow night?
Even,
You want to know if you'll be
I'm
there?
not sure, I have to see.
Alright, tomorrow night, the Kovid Al-Nissen in Mr. Bashkin's house, 9 o'clock. And we finish also.
So let me continue. I want to finish this
Finishing
Pedic, and I
Chazal.
have to do earlier today. I gotta leave it. See, what I just said is a very important point. No, really, because honestly, this Hemshech is complicated enough as it is. And now we brought so many other things into it. If the Rebbe Rashab felt it was necessary to bring other things, remember he knows all these ideas also that he could have also said a qualifier. Remember how look how specific he is and thorough. He could have said here, the Av Shalosid Love the Yesh will have. Why did he bring that in here? Because it's a completely different subject. You know, it's not relevant to this. And don't get me wrong, I understand we want to get it, but that's not the end of this Hemshech is meant to bring the unity between the higher and the lower. That's the whole point of this Hemshech. Am I being clear?
I mean, I probably didn't express myself properly. I have a specific exact question, exactly what you've been teaching here. Meaning that when the Rebbe makes a very strong statement that we don't have any ability to understand the Mahus Ayin Eloki, or we wouldn't be because then though you yesh klal. There was such a strong statement. Then when you went on to explain what Mahus is, I was not able to understand the statement by the Rebbe that you can't understand Mahus at all. And then because then you won't be yesh. And then when you define what Mahus is, it seemed like that's what that we do all the time in Chassidus, trying to understand the Mahus. So then it seems like a contradiction to the way how you define Mahus.
So maybe I didn't explain Mahuz properly, maybe.
Because, I mean,
let's
down here, what it means is, you said it's
but Eliezer, 1 second, let me just say
that. Which is what Chassidus is, how godly works in this world, and what he does in the world, which is all what we try to learn.
Why can't that be the Metzias?
Because that's how you defeat Rabbi
So what's that? Hold on a second.
He defined it as understanding what it does and how it works. The inner purpose of godliness in the world.
Legitimate question.
Chassidus, that's what we do.
Okay, 1 second, okay, let me respond. It's a legitimate question. Let's put it this way. One thing is for sure, what it says here is absolutely right. What I said is lav dafka. So if what I said does not satisfy what it says here, then I didn't say it right, or I'm wrong, or I have to explain it more. I explained Muhus and Metzias initially just to understand what the words meant. I wasn't talking about the Ayin Eliki. I was talking about a table, science. Just let's distinguish the two. I really didn't talk about Muhus or Lukus. I was just saying Muhus and Metzias. What's Muhus? What's Metzias? Metzias is the parameters, the dimensions, the measurements, etc. And Muhus is Eich U'Mahu. That was just an introduction to Muhus and Metzias. Now he goes into this. We know we have Yediyah in the Ayin Metzias of the Ayin Eliki, not in the Mahus of the Ayin Eliki. I don't think I really discussed what the Mahus of the Ayin Eliki is.
Right.
What you did is you applied what I said about Mahus B'chlal to Mahus Ayin
What it
Eliki.
does, what
But
it
it's-
is, how it
Now,
is.
you
Yeah.
were using a muscle. You weren't really saying.
I was saying there's a marshal only what Mahus is. So let me, as far as Mahus of Elikus, clearly, if there's a Gili if there's a Yediyah in that, means we stop existing. So clearly it's not just understanding that God has a personality or understanding God has Eir. Whatever we understand is, as you just said, Mitzias. When we learn Chassidus, we're learning the Mitzias. You could say it's the Mahus of the Mitzias, maybe. But it's not the Mahus of the Mahus, for sure not. Because the Yediyah in the Mahus would actually affect our existence. So when we learn Chassidus, it doesn't consume us. Meaning, like the fire he's saying here, it doesn't consume us. So that itself is proof that our learning has to be a Metzias level at the end of the day. That's why the whole point of Bitla Hayesh. Let's be very honest here. People learn Chassidus all day and all night. Chassidus She'idin. And you won't find them lying, you won't find them deceptive, they won't find them duplicitous, refined, and so on. But there's a Yesh there. What does a Yesh mean? It may express itself sometimes in a subtle way, sometimes not so subtle. But there's a Yesh. A Yesh means they're not a Merkavah Elikus. There's an existence that has now subjugated itself to God. Because and they have very deep understanding of Chassidus and Atzmus and Eir and everything we're learning. Let's say after we master Ayin Beis, it still may not be the Mahus. And the proof will be that the Yesh will still be there. And unfortunately, the Yesh sometimes acts out also. I can't speak for those Chassidus Shidin because I'm not one of them, but there was a guy like that. I mean, I've met Chassidus Shidin, and they'll tell you, they'll be the first to tell you, not just because they're humble. I'm still a Yesh, at the end of the day, I'm still a Yesh. I'm not the... Rabbi Hillel Paritcher would go to sleep out of Shabbos. Because he knew that's time when it's the spiritual sleep. Alter Rebbe fell asleep. Alter Rebbe was not a Yesh. He just was a channel. His exact tugma, exact example. Whereas Rabbi Hillel was a Yesh that aligned himself. So Chassidus teaches us how to align ourselves. La'asad Lavei, we could start saying we'll have Yediyah Samahus. Today, according to this, we don't have Yediyah Samahus. So all that we learn is ultimately Metzias. That's what I would say.
But we do have examples of Yediyas Mahus, it seems to be apparently, in the Chassidim that had Kalas and Nefesh. Kalas and Nefesh is a reality, it's certain Jews.
Okay, so Kalas and Nefesh,
that was consumed, like
and,
the,
and someone like that would have died, yeah.
Yeah, but we have Mala, the Mala.
Yeah, so they're no longer Yesh. That's exactly, but they don't remain a Yesh. That's exactly the point. Once they have that, they don't remain. They can't come back to tell about
Because
it.
they are learning the Mahus until they've developed that.
They're not learning. They perceived
Experiencing
it, and it was not the kavanah. It was always hepech kavanah. What they did was wrong.
Rabbi Akiva at that point was not a Yesh when he came out of parties.
Rabbi Akiva is not. No, I would say Rabbi Akiva remained a Yesh.
So
Absolutely
he didn't
remained a
go
Yesh.
all the way into parties like the other three.
Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. But you asking now? Are you asking now on what I'm saying, or are you asking now?
You're
Other
saying that we're learning maybe.
I clarify. You asked a question
Right.
that based on how I explain Mahus,
Right.
it doesn't seem consistent. So I explain myself now. I explain Mahus in general. Now it comes to Medus that he's talking about here.
Sure.
All that we learn in Chassidus is not the Mahus that he's talking here.
Okay.
That's obvious. Or else this would happen to people.
We're learning maybe the Mahus of the Metzias, that's what you're
Yeah.
going to say?
Or maybe the Metzias of the Mahus. There's also that.
Let's see.
Okay, let's continue on.
Okay.
That's Nevroim. The reason I'm surprised at the question is for another reason. Just look into your own heart. I mean, we look through this. Even the deepest moment of your deepest understanding. The people stood in front of the Rebbe. What, did the Yesh suddenly disappeared?
For a short while.
We're not talking about a short while. We're talking about, what he's talking here is, for a moment you sense something. That's not what he's talking about here.
That's not Yediyas Mahus or something.
Avla HaNetzalim. Look, now Nivroim are going to learn about Netzalim. So clearly we're going to learn what Netzalim know. And we're also going to be Metzias for us. Avla Netzalim, Hagam Shehen Gam Ken B'chinis Yesh Ma'ayin. I just want to say one thing that I said last time, I think. You want to know what Mahus is? When you get up in the morning, or middle of a fast day, you know you're hungry and thirsty. You don't have to look at Shulchan Aruch. You don't need a mashpiyah for that, right? How do you know it? Because you know it through your guts and your kishkas. Because Eilam Haza is the muhus of our relationship. We have a muhus relationship with Elam Haza. We know it's muhus, it knows us, and we're slaves to it, to be blunt. That's muhus. When the day comes that you don't have to look at a calendar and know it's Shabbos or Yom Kippur or Shulchan Aruch, you'll know that you have experienced a muhus thing. Till then, you know it's Shabbos, Mitzias of Shabbos. Muhus Shabbos, you feel Shabbos when sundown goes. How many people feel Shabbos? Yeah, I know we feel, we don't go to work. So the muhus is not just knowing, it's a feeling that you're one with it. That's the bottom line. When you will know, just like your hand you will not put your hand in fire. Why? Because you know the muhus of fire. You know most of your hand. If I put my hand in fire, I'm going to get burned. I don't even need to know. I don't have to put it in the fire to know that. I know it so well that I can imagine it. You won't put your hand in fire. We do an Aveda, God forbid, we don't feel it's fire. Because we don't know the Mitzias, that God said don't do it. Some people don't know the Mitzias also, but those that know the Mitzias. God said don't do it, but you don't feel that you're getting burned when you do it. If we did, there wouldn't be one person that would hurt anyone else. L'asad love, for you to hurt another person, for you to say one word of Lashon Hara, to do anything not appropriate would be just like putting your hand in fire. That's muhus. And the other is mitzias. One is you know what you're not supposed to do, the other one is you feel what you're not supposed to do. I mean feel, I don't just mean, feel that it's impossible for you to do it because it's just so obvious. That's real perception. So we know a lot about God. We know what God wants from us. We understand the depths. But muhus is not more kamus. It's not more knowledge. Das Elyon is not more knowledge than Das Tachten. Das Tachten I know so much, then I'm going to learn more, I'll know Das Elyon. No, it's a whole different perception. One sees the glove and knows there's a hand inside the glove. The other one sees the hand and knows that there's a glove. It's a lekuz b'pshittus and elam is b'schashus. It's a big difference. We know there's a glove inside the hand, a hand inside the glove, God created. But we don't feel the hand. If we felt the hand, the glove would probably have to burn up, like he says here, the way we are right now. The purpose of Chassidus and the whole purpose of the interface is to train the glove to be able to perceive the hand and become one with it. That's the whole Pnimis HaKelim and Chetzenis HaKelim. So that's Yediyas HaMuhus. Yediyas HaMuhus is not more quantity of knowledge. It's not like you learn another day, another hour, another 100 hours, you're suddenly going to come to it. It's a qualitative shift to seeing that God is real and we're a novelty. And that is a very big achievement. That's why we're here thousands of years trying to figure out how to transform that. Matan Torah, it says, Lefisha, for a second they felt it. But then it went right back to material reality, and now we're working on permanently creating that the material world.
And they died.
For the second, Baruch Nishmasa, Now here's the percent. Avlan Etzolim, Agam Shem, Gam Kim Bechinis Yesh Ma'ayin. In Etzolim. Even though they're also Yesh Ma'ayin, remember I discussed before, they're Yesh Ma'ayin from the God's perspective, because why? Because Chochma Ma'ayin Timotza. It also comes from a level of Ayin, from nothingness. Even Atzilus, even Chachma of Atzilus, Lefierach, the source, is also outside of the source. Therefore, is Yesh Ma'ayin. However, as we discussed the difference between Er and Keli, he's going to say it's compared to the source. It's as Yesh Ma'ayin. Okay, he's talking about Chetzenis HaChachma here, the outer level of Chachma, the beginning of the cosmic order. But even though it's Yesh Ma'ayin, it's not real Yesh Mamish, not a true Yesh. It's not actual Yesh. Commission, to explain now. Yesh Ma'ayin that Atzilus. The Yesh Ma'ayin, remember Yesh Ma'ayin here, and remember I explained that Solim is imparting, like the scanning, the sages, the spirit of Moshe was imparted to them. Creation is you create actually an outside object. So Atzilus, compared to its source, is Yesh Ma'ayin, but like he explains elsewhere, the Yesh Ma'ayin of Atzilus is al derech meiven davar mitech davar. It's the idea that it's similar to the idea of understanding an idea from an idea. What do you call it? Extrapolating. Meiven davar mitech davar. One idea leads you to another.
Which is Gilui Ohala.
Yeah, he's going to say that. Yeah. So here we go. Shemetech seichel echad u meiven seichel acher. From one seichel he understands another seichel. Shezeu seichel chada sheinu muhus ha-seichel ha-kedem mamish. The second seichel, the second idea, is a nuai concept. That's not the muhus of the original mamish. It's not actually the muhus. personality of the previous idea. It's not like details within a seichel. You have an idea and then you break it down in details. Or the expansion of the ideas of a certain idea. So he's adding a third level now. So he's saying like this: there's Maven Tev B'Tev Dover, understanding one idea from another, but the new idea is a new idea. When you talk about an idea, expansion of an idea, or its details, it's still the original idea. Because the details and the expansion are the same mahus. It's the same idea, but you're fleshing it out. And that's why when you flesh it out, it explains it as it's known, it explains it better. Because it's exactly the same mahus. The same, he's using the word mahus. It's the same mahus, the same entity, the same personality. Another example. When you summarize, a summary, synopsis. That again is a synopsis of the previous seichel. Except it's brief, it's abbreviated. That's not yeshmayin. That's ilavol. That's an idea, you flesh it out. You expand it, you summarize it. 3 different ways he explained how. But when one idea leads to another, that one theory leads you to a corollary, a theorem to a corollary, I don't know, that may be Klal and Prat, I'm not sure. But when one idea it helps you innovate another idea. How do you, no, that's...
It's Chachma Chachma you're talking about, right?
Yeah, maybe though, yeah. That's not the same idea. It's a new idea. It's a new idea. In other words, for example, in copyright law, we won't be able to. If you did the first thing, if you took someone's idea and just fleshed it out and summarized it, it could be shown, proven. It's the original idea. But if you took someone's idea and because of that idea you conveyed a new idea, and that can be established, you can't patent it. I mean, just giving you an example. It's a new idea. You wouldn't have had it without the original idea. But it's your innovation. You extrapolated from that idea a new concept. That's not the same mahus. Because this is that from the same seichel, from that seichel you understand another seichel, another idea. Nevertheless, it's still not a separate mahus either. In other words, it's not like, well, let's continue. Because it's close to the original idea, which from where you derived the concept. Because since this understanding of this new idea came from the original seichel,
So even though it's a yesh and an ayin, it's not a mahus acher.
Right, that's exactly right. Where did he come from the seichel? It didn't just sit and you thought of an idea, it came from that idea. Therefore, it necessitates us to say that there has to be a connection between the two. Okay. You also must say that this new idea was encompassed in the original idea, but it was concealed.
It looks a little like Ilavalo. A little like.
Right, exactly. But this is again interface. It's the splitting the hair between exactly
Goes in a
Atzilus.
different direction.
No, it's actually a very, very interesting way to explain the whole
It doesn't go
Atzilus.
down, it goes parallel.
But it's more concealed than the details in the spark of an idea, in the nakud, in the idea. That's kol prat. That's a general idea that has details in it. Here, it's a new idea, so that's more concealed. So the details are less concealed in the original idea than a new idea that's concealed in the original idea. So maybe you could sue after all.
Yeah, it's like
No, I don't know about that.
it's like degrees, but somehow you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
to a particular degree.
And this is al derech. This can be compared as if it carries within it the original seichel, not that it contains it. L'chein davka mishu novin hari hu meven dover mitayl dover.
Because it's who behelem yesel. It was one line.
Yeah, and that's why it's not like everyone's going to extract details. Doesn't take as much effort to bring out of
Is it true
the.
to say that the difference between Yesh and Ayin and Ilam is just a question of degree? Almost. So, I mean, what
In
he's
some
saying
ways,
is-
not completely. In some things, yes. Some things not. It depends what you're talking. If you're talking about from the source, from Atzilus, yes. But you're talking from below, not necessarily, because Atzilus and Beriyah are very, very far apart. So it depends whose perspective. L'chein nafka mishu nevin.
What's
So-
the definition of Navi?
Novin is a maven, like a novin, a versteher. A novin, I mean maven, same thing. Shu novin, because maven does. So in other words, what is he pointing out here? He's emphasizing how it's behelem. That's why you need a novin, or because it's. Oh no, you need a novin. You need someone who has a real understanding to be able to extract an idea from an idea. Av makom mokim harihu kol boy. Nevertheless, it's included in it. So it carries it, not like klal prat. Okay. L'chein harizeh mevi gam ken emek ba'seichel hakedim. That's why this too brings depth. Remember, he said the details bring out depth. This too brings out depth in the original seichel. That shows you that there's a commonality there. It's not just a completely foreign idea.
It's not a mushroom.
It's not a mushal, exactly. A mushal would be Beriyah. This is Netzal. Das Trokta Reis Atifkeit Ba'Seichel HaKedem. No, was geht zu der Meinung, was in Yiddish? It expresses a tifkeit, a depth in the deeper thing. But what does the parentheses add over this?
Can you give us an example?
I have to, let me read more and see how he goes here. I
He
wanna
soon
read-
says that. As soon as we say what a marshal is.
The Keshem Sha'avon Seichel Zeh Uma Seichel HaKedem. And just like this new idea came from the original idea, Kamoikin Haru Meisav Emu Primya Seichel HaKedem. Just like it originated from there, in other words, it goes back and forth. It originated from there and then it returns there. It gives something back. It returns depth.
It's moist.
Meisif, Emek, B'prim B'asech L'Akedim. Yeah.
You understand better the Seichel HaKelim.
Yeah.
You're getting it different.
No, for sure, because
Yes.
in other words, that's okay. Fine, very good. The kol zeh hu mipnei shu muhus acher. Mipnei she'ein muhus acher. I'm sorry. And this is not a separate muhus. Because if it was a separate muhus, why can't you say that gave that? Okay, let's read on. I don't want to. The ein zeh k'may ha'seichel shabai de mashal v'chida. This is not like seichel that comes through an example or through a riddle. Sha'seichel hakedim misalim l'gamer b'levush zeh. When you give an example or a riddle, then the original idea is completely concealed in this garment. That's why it's a riddle. It's an example. When you look at the example, you may not see the idea. The person who's giving the example sees it. But the recipient sees now a strange new example. Something that's not the original idea. And then from the example, he comes back to the idea. It's complete muhus. In other words, if I gave an example from some example from a foreign object, that brings me back to the seichel. But the mashal is is absolutely a different what's the word? A different different entity. I want to say a different whatever different plane. Like the examples that Shlomo HaMelech gave, King Solomon. Even when they come to the nimshal, to the thing it's an example for, so Shlomo HaMelech had wisdom, and he had the wisdom to give excellent examples, and even when the people who heard those examples came back to understand the idea, they didn't get it the way Shlomo HaMelech got it. The best proof is they probably can't give the same. They wouldn't be able to do examples. That means they don't get it at that depth. That's an example and a riddle. But a maven davar is not a separate muhus. If you do it, I think we may have to stop here because I have to be somewhere earlier today. It's already,
See your way, Yontif?
yeah. Cape Cod.
If you spend any,
Let's stop here because it's already. We'll have to finish this chapter next time. So bottom line is, he's in the middle of the discussion how Netzalim are different than Evrayim, and Netzalim are also Yesh Ma'ayin, but they are the same, they're a different seichel, but in the same mahus.
We just read the kids.
Mahus acher.
We just want to read the kids, and maybe we'll just get a, by the time we go back to this, yeah.
The kids is going to be from the end also, and I have to read it inside myself.
Are you ממשיך על ישראל חג או a week after ישראל חג?
I want to shut this.
What is it?
Push that silver button.
I did stop, yeah.
And
It
it's probably-
says it's green, it's stop.
Green, it's red inside, I mean, this, okay.
Someone look if it's off.